Before Egypt, before Greece, before Rome, there was a land where gods walked among men. This land birthed writing, law, cities, and the very concept of civilization. So by the end of this video, you'll learn how Mesopotamia and the civilizations that flourished from it laid the groundwork for pretty much every system that we take for granted today. They invented the first form of writing. They built massive cities with temples that touched the sky. They created laws that shaped justice for thousands of years. And what's wild is that we are still living in the world that they imagined. This is the story of the civilizations that started everything. And once you learn what they built, you will never look at history or modern life the same way again. The name Mesopotamia means the land between two rivers. It got that name because it sat between two big rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. Today, that area is mostly Iraq, though it stretches to certain parts of Syria and Turkey. About 5,000 years ago, this very land was one of the first places where human civilization started to emerge. The rivers were both helpful and dangerous. They gave water for drinking and farming, but they also flooded without warning and sometimes dried up completely. People had to learn how to deal with this, so they worked together to dig canals to move the water, build big storage ponds, and created systems to keep everything running smoothly. It was because of this hard work that cities started to grow. Places like Uruk, Eridu, and Lagash became centers of life. Huge temples called ziggurats were built, rising high above the land. People invented writing, not to write stories at first, but to keep track of food, trade, and laws. Kings ruled the cities, and priests said that they could talk to the gods. But behind the scenes, the farmers, the workers, so the ordinary folk, were the ones who really kept things going. This wasn't just the start of a civilization. It was the start of civilization as we know it. Things we still have today like governments, laws, religions, even trade between countries, it all started here, in the land between two rivers. Let's dive in and explore how it all began. Let's start off with the Sumerians, one of the first real civilizations in history that didn't just live in huts or simple villages. They built full cities like Uruk, Ur, and Eridu. These cities now had roads, neighborhoods, markets, and even jobs that people did to keep the community running smoothly. So they weren't just random groups of people living together at this point. They were organized. Think of it as a small country. In the middle of their cities stood huge buildings called ziggurats. These were giant pyramid-shaped temples where people worshiped their gods. But they weren't just for prayer. There were also places where leaders made decisions and ruled the city. Around these temples there were markets where people trade all sorts of things. Animals, cloth, grain, and even special items brought from faraway places. Every city had its own gods and goddesses, and people believed that these gods and goddesses were responsible for things like justice, love, war, and the weather. The Sumerians also had government buildings where workers kept records, organized supplies, and collected taxes. This was one of the first examples of a system where a group of people helped run a city, kind of like how city halls work today. But maybe the most amazing thing the Sumerians did was invent writing. They created a writing system called cuneiform, where they used wedge-shaped marks on clay tablets. At first it was mainly used to keep track of things like food, laws, taxes, but soon enough it would move on to other things like storytelling, science, and just ideas about life. They also came up with a number system based on 60 called the sexagesimal system, and that is one of the very things that we still use today. That is the reason why there are 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, and 360 degrees in a circle. And then there's the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest stories ever written down. It's about a powerful king who is part god, part human. He goes on a long journey to try to find a way to live forever. Along the way he has to fight monsters, talk to gods, he even loses his best friend, and he learns that even powerful kings can't escape death. This is a story about life, fear, friendship, and growing up. The same kinds of things people still think about today. So even though the Sumerians lived more than 5,000 years ago, their ideas and traditions still shape the world that we live in today. Then came Sargon of Akkad, one of the first people in history to rule over many cities and lands as one big empire. Around the year 2300 BC, Sargon did something that no one else had done before. He took over all of the cities in Mesopotamia and brought them together under one government. Before him, cities like Uruk, Ur, Lagash, and Eridu were like little countries, each with their own king, god, and rules, and they fought with each other over land, trade, and resources. Sargon changed everything. He used smart military strategies, made deals with allies, and used this power overall very wisely to bring the Akkadian Empire together. It stretched all the way from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. He built a capital city called Akkad, though we still don't really know exactly where it was. He also made the Akkadian language the official language for government, trade, and diplomacy, helping people from different places feel a little bit more connected. Sargon's rule was important because he showed that one person could lead a big group of different peoples and cities. He built a strong government, had a professional army, and set up trade with faraway places. He showed that it was possible to control a lot of land and people with smart planning. But ruling such a big empire wasn't easy. After many years, the region had a long drought. Crops didn't grow well, and people didn't have enough food. This made life harder and caused problems across the empire. People started getting upset with the Akkadian rulers, and some of them started to rebel. It was hard for the government to keep control of faraway places, especially when enemies like the Gutians started attacking. Eventually, the Akkadian Empire couldn't hold it together any longer, and broke apart into smaller kingdoms. But Sargon's ideas of empire and leadership didn't just go away. Later rulers would later copy his style of organizing an empire. He showed that it was possible to unite that many people under one ruler, but he also showed how difficult it is to maintain that position forever. Babylon wasn't just any old city. It became one of the most famous places in the ancient world. At first, it was just a small town near the Euphrates River that didn't stand out that much. But everything changed when a king named Hammurabi took charge around 1792 BC. He was a smart and strong leader who turned Babylon into the main city of a huge empire. This would become the center of politics, business, and culture in Mesopotamia. What made Hammurabi really special was that he created one of the first big sets of written laws called the Code of Hammurabi. These laws were carved into a big stone and placed in public so everyone could see them. You've probably heard the phrase an eye for an eye. That actually came from his code. It meant that punishments should match the crime. So this wasn't just about revenge, it was more about keeping things fair. The code had rules about almost everything. About owning land, getting married, even what to do in the case of someone breaking the law. But these punishments were not the same for everyone though. This highly depended on who you were as a person. Whether you were just a regular person, a rich person, or a slave, the punishments would vary. But still, this was a big step forward because it showed that there were clear rules for society. Many years later, another king named Nebuchadnezzar II made Babylon even greater. And yes, I know that name is a mouthful. He ruled from 605 to 562 BC and built giant walls around the city that were so wide, people said you could ride chariots on top of them. These walls protected Babylon and showed off its power. During his time, Babylon became more than just a capital city. It was full of life, with people coming from all over to trade, learn, build, and pray. It had huge temples, busy markets, and smart thinkers. The city became a shining example of what a civilization could be. Thanks to these kings, Babylon became a symbol of human creativity and power, a place where law, religions, the military, and the arts all came together. Now, before we move on to the next story, be sure to hit that subscribe button if you love ancient history and you would like to keep exploring the past through these stories. If the Babylonians were known for rules and laws, the Assyrians were known for something completely different: power through strength and fear. Starting around 2000 BC, the Assyrians grew from a very small town called Ashur into one of the mightiest and most feared empires of the time. Their kings were smart and tough military leaders. Assyrian soldiers were some of the best in history. They used powerful weapons and invented smart tools to break into enemy cities, like battering rams, towers, and even tunnels. But their biggest weapon wasn't something they carried. It was fear. The Assyrians believed scaring people would stop them from fighting back, so they made examples of their enemies. They showed what would happen if you rebelled. They would punish entire cities, moved people away from their homes, and made sure that everyone knew about it. This made other cities too scared to resist, helping the Assyrians gain control and maintaining control over so many different cultures. But the Assyrians weren't just warriors, they also loved knowledge. Their capital city, Nineveh, became a center for learning. They built a huge library filled with thousands of clay tablets. These held stories like the Epic of Gilgamesh and medical records and other useful information that is still very relevant today. It is in part thanks to this particular library that we know so much about the ancient world today. Without it, a lot of history may have been forgotten forever. But even though they were so strong, the Assyrians wouldn't stay in power forever. By the 600s BC, the empire just grew too large to manage easily. The people that they had conquered were angry and started to rebel, and at the same time, other powers like the Babylonians were teaming up against them. In the year 612 BC, their capital, Nineveh, was destroyed. That was the end of the Assyrian Empire. After centuries of power, their fall was fast and final, but their impact on history was massive. Last but not least, we have the Persians. They weren't from Mesopotamia itself, they came from a land farther east on the Iranian plateau, but they rose to become one of the most powerful empires the world had ever seen. Leading them was Cyrus the Great. Around the middle of the 6th century BC, Cyrus brought all the Persian tribes together and began conquering land. He didn't stop until he built an empire so large that stretched across 3 continents. He took over many places, including Mesopotamia, the rich kingdom of Lydia, the Nile Valley King in Egypt, parts of Central Asia, and even into what is now Pakistan. What made Cyrus and the Persian Empire special wasn't just how big it was how they ruled. Instead of forcing everyone to act the same or crushing them with harsh rules, they let people keep their languages, religious and local leaders as long as they followed the Persian king and paid taxes. In the movie 300, when that emissary is sent to Sparta and is speaking to King Leonidas, he tells him that Xerxes requires only a small gift of earth and water. This was precisely what that meant. This approach actually helped a lot in keeping the peace in such a large and diverse empire. People didn't really feel the need to fight back as much because they were treated with respect, relatively speaking. One famous example is when Cyrus took over the city of Babylon in the year 539 BC. He didn't just destroy it or hurt its people. He entered peacefully and even allowed groups like the Jews, who had been forced to live in Babylon, to go back home and rebuild their temples. Under the Persians, cities like Babylon kept growing and stayed important. They fixed canals and water systems to help farmers, and they supported temples and religious buildings. This made the local people more likely to accept Persian rule. The Persian Empire ruled Mesopotamia and the neighboring lands for more than 200 years. During that time, there was peace and progress after centuries of fighting, but all of that would change in the late 300s BC. A new leader named Alexander the Great from Greece came with his armies. He defeated the Persians, took over their empire, and began a new time in history where Greek and Eastern cultures were mixed. So even though the Persians were not from Mesopotamia originally, they were the last great rulers of the region before Alexander the Great, and their smart way of running such a huge empire with respect and fairness and good organization was definitely a game changer. But like all empires, their time eventually ended, showing that even the strongest powers must one day give way to change. From the first cities to empires that spanned the known world, Mesopotamia was not just the beginning of history, it was the engine that made history possible, and it all happened right here, in the land between 2 rivers. Thank you so much for joining me for today's tale. If you enjoyed what you saw, if you learned anything new, please go ahead and drop a like, leave a comment, share this video with someone else. That's a very small button for you, and a gigantic leap for my channel. Until the next tale, farewell. And may the gods smile upon you.